this is abominable. You know, the way in which you have a gory depiction glorifying the assassination of former Prime Minister of India, Indira Gandhi, with her clothes splashed with red to depict blood flowing, and then an open celebration and glorification of the assassins. Would the assassinations or any act of violence against Canadian politicians be allowed, or would attempted assassinations on American presidents be celebrated in Canada? Would it be allowed? And if not, which I'm sure it wouldn't, then why is this being allowed on Canadian soil?
Well, it's an absolute disgrace to Canada. It's an escalation in the crescendo of glorification of violence and terror that has been growing over the past many years. And the reason why it has been growing is because Canadian politicians wink at it. They tolerate it. They don't say anything about it. They pretend that they're not Khalistani, they don't have Khalistani sympathies when they run for election, because you can't get elected in Canada by confessing that you are a Khalistani. You have to conceal and pretend and disguise it and deny it, and pretend that, because there isn't really any support except in a tiny minority. But obviously this is an escalation. This goes beyond mere printouts and pictures on Twitter and so forth. This is an attempt to reenact and to celebrate this disgraceful assassination. And the reason it continues is because, firstly, Canadian politicians are cowards. They allow it to happen. They're afraid of losing votes. And I'm referring now to all parties, not just to the Liberal government of Justin Trudeau, which, as you know, depends on the support of the NDP led by Jagmeet Singh, clearly a Khalistani sympathizer, but also because of the weakness of Indian politicians in their response. And what I mean is that Indian politicians like to bang the table and say, why doesn't Canada crack down? Why don't you lock them up? Well, they know the answer to that. They've known it for decades now. The reason Canada won't lock up people for saying things we disagree with is because we have freedom of speech, and they're not going to throw that out. They're not going to abolish freedom of speech. Indians are appalled by this. I'm well aware of it. But the fact is that we have freedom of speech. Only when it goes into violence do we take action. But the flip side of that is Canadian politicians also have freedom of speech, but they don't use it to denounce this as the disgrace that it is. And that is the core problem. India needs to be more, I'm fine with India being tough on this and banging the table, but I think India also needs to be a bit smarter. Smarter on this.
But, you know, I agree with your initial comments, Terry. Terry, your initial comments I agree with, that it's a disgrace. However, I find it totally unacceptable that you're trying to make this a freedom of speech issue. Under which category of freedom of speech would you say today that in America or in Canada you would support Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi or Osama bin Laden? Be careful about lecturing India on freedom of speech, because the same things apply to the Islamic State, to the Al-Qaeda. This is ineptitude on your part. Some people may call it woke behavior. It may be, one minute, just 1 minute. You see, you can't have your cake and eat it too. The freedom of speech has its limits. You are celebrating the assassination of an Indian Prime Minister. This is not being done in a covert way. It is being done openly, which means that Canada, Canadian authorities, Canadian politicians, the Canadian system has decided that for its own political considerations, it is going to become a country that becomes an epicenter of terrorism.